So we come to this picture. I had an artist draw this back in the 90s. And what we identify here, of course, is that we have this axis, primary axis. But one of the other things that when you look at this picture and after a while of questioning, you go, well, what about these bits? These bits here. That we also have these in-between bits. And that we can identify that as these primary axes function, because it's moving, it's dynamic, it's spinning, as they function, the nature of these bits are going to change, aren't they? So we can gather that bit of information. Okay. Now, one of the interesting things is that I made this picture up, out of my own visioning. And all these pictures are because I need to get this out of my head. I can't carry it all. And so I draw pictures. And so I made that picture so that I could look at that. And then I started travelling about 10 or 15 years ago, and all my children are grown up and so on. I was able to start travelling around the world. And this is what I found. And what we have is essentially every culture on the planet in some way identifies this eightfold structure. So this is the Chinese, the I Ching. This is Tibetan mandala. And again, we can identify, especially in the middle here, that they're identifying the difference between this cross and then this cross here as being different. This is the American Indian medicine wheel. And I think the Tibetans and I think the American Indians have a lot of information about these and what the energetic activities within this structure is. I think they still have it. Now, this is the Mayan calendar. And again, we get the same process with this differentiation between these two crosses. These now are Muslim images. These are out of the Mosquita in Spain, in Cordoba. And this is off a 10th century floor that is 1 metre down, and they dug it out. And so you can imagine, to my delight, that this is the picture I had drawn, and that's the picture on the 10th century Muslim floor. This is a picture from the south of Chile. They're called the Mapuches, and that's their calendar. So we then come into our Christian culture, and we find that we have all these same symbols. The interesting thing about church crosses, they always have these other little bits on them. Up until about the middle of the 1800s. After that they start to lose them. But prior to that, they always had some kind of secondary cross indicated in the primary cross. And the interesting thing about cathedrals is you walk around and there's a lot of these what are called Greek crosses, that they're the equal cross. And you can see it in their windows, in their tiling, all sorts of places. Now these are Muslim in Spain. These all come from Spain. And these are indoors, churches, doors, but we start finding it everywhere. Mundane things like the top of a seat. Once you see this picture, you'll see it everywhere. At that stage, you've reached the stage of development of octo-eye. And of course, these basic images here as well. These are all out of the Melbourne Cathedral, and they are the same patterning as the Salisbury Cathedral in England. And so as you're walking around in this spiritual building, these are the images that you're being met with. And we so easily just think, aren't they nice little images? But actually, they're all these eightfold patterns. So this is the image that they're giving you the whole time. This is a picture of the chapter house the Wells Cathedral chapter house. This was built in 1300s by the Knights Templar, and in 1313 they were persecuted, tried and persecuted in this building. This picture here is out of the Chartres Cathedral, and so this is the labyrinth in the Chartres Cathedral. And one of the things to identify is that there's actually 12 rings in here. We can add that 12. Now this picture here is St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And so we can identify that the building is a Greek cross. The interesting thing about it is that it's actually facing to the east. This relates to these pictures up here. So most Christian churches face with the main big window to the east, and you walk in the west. This building is the reverse and faces to the east, which is how the Egyptians made their sun temples, to the east. And this is the obelisk that they stole from Alexandria. So this is actually an Egyptian sun temple, St. Peter's Basilica. And this is the square, and in the square they have got the eight-sided picture. And if we could see the picture better, it's basically, these are the, I think it's the summer solstice and the winter solstice and so on. So the Christians are right into this. This is basically the story. This is the most recent cathedral built on the planet in Barcelona, and it too has the same basic structure. So this is still happening. There's an interesting story about St. Paul's Cathedral in England, where Christopher Wren built a Greek cross cathedral, and he had to hide it from the Parliament, who were paying for it, because they didn't want him to build it. But he surreptitiously, the way he did it was he laid the foundations all in one go. So instead of building this part of the cathedral and that part of the cathedral, he just laid the foundations for the whole lot and ran for it, and then they couldn't stop him, and so St. Paul's Cathedral is also one of these. But we can see by the 1600s that this consciousness of this form is being lost. And I'd like to suggest that the Knights Templar were the people that really brought this impulse into our culture in 1100, and that the idea of these buildings is that they actually set up a resonant tone. And that this tone, if you ever stand in the middle of these, creates quite a sense of harmony. And that these buildings were a conscious attempt by humanity to evolve. That if you look at humanity prior to this, it was pretty barbaric and pretty nasty, and that something had to happen. And that by building these buildings and the people being inside them, they were being affected and were able to organise their energetic bodies in a manner that would help us. Now, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but if we look at the shape of this room, we're actually sitting in one of these structures right now. And it suggests that this position under here is the place that you should all just sort of hang out in a little bit. Which, you know, good on you, mate. And, but do it. Just go and stand there and just see what happens. And so here we have this in our culture. And this is basically what we're talking about. We're talking about a primary cross that is based on a reality of north, south, east and west, and then a secondary cross that is based on things like the solstices and the sunsets. So we have, in a sense, an archetypal cross and an earth-based cross. These are earth-based phenomena. And so in here we have the cosmic and the earthly showing up in this diagram.